After too many failures and too many closed doors, Stella was desperate. Desperation twisted into a knot of anxiety so tight that she could barely breathe. She had resisted this for as long as she could, but now she had no choice. For the first time in her life, she was going to beg. Her fingers trembled as she set a worn-out cap on the cold subway floor. The fabric was frayed, a mirror of her own unraveling life. She stood beside it, eyes cast down, arms wrapped tightly around herself, as if trying to shield against the shame pressing in from all sides. People streamed past her, a blur of hurried footsteps and muffled conversations. Most ignored her. Some gave her a passing glance, their expressions filled with either disinterest or contempt. A few tossed coins, barely slowing down as they did. But then came the harsh voices. A middle-aged man in a suit sneered as he passed. "Pathetic. Young, healthy, and begging. You should be ashamed of yourself." A woman in a heavy coat shook her head in disgust. "Go get a job like the rest of us. The world doesn't owe you a thing." Another man, this one older, muttered, "Lazy people these days. Always looking for handouts." Every word was a knife to her gut. Every glance burned into her skin. Her hands clenched at her sides. They didn't know. They didn't know why she was here, why she had nowhere to go, why she couldn't just get a job. They didn't know that she'd tried, that she had stood in line for hours at shelters, only to be turned away because there was no room, that she'd filled out application after application, only to be told she had no experience, no references, no way to prove she was worth hiring. That the last place she had called home had been a narrow cot in a shelter, and before that, a friend's couch, until even that kindness ran out. Her stomach clenched with hunger, an ache she had long grown used to. A small coin clinked into the cap. She flinched at the sound and looked up hesitantly. An elderly woman stood there, her face kind but filled with something else. Pity. "Here, dear," the woman said softly, pressing a few more coins into Stella's hand. "It's not much, but I hope it helps." Stella swallowed the lump in her throat. "Thank you," she whispered, barely able to meet the woman's eyes. The woman gave her a sad smile before walking away, swallowed up by the crowd. Stella's fingers curled around the coins. Humiliation burned inside her, but desperation was stronger. And then, as if on cue, trouble came. 3 men, rough, unkempt, their faces hardened by the streets, swaggered toward her. "Who the hell are you?" one of them sneered, his breath reeking of stale cigarettes. "This is our spot. Get lost!" Before she could react, they shoved her. Stella stumbled back, raising her hands in defense. "Please, leave me alone. I'll go, I swear," she pleaded, her voice shaking. But they weren't satisfied with just words. Another shove. "Look at this little beggar thinking she can just waltz in here," the second thug laughed, snatching the meager coins from her cap. "Yeah, you think the streets are free real estate?" the third one spat. "This is our turf." A final hard push sent Stella flying backward. She crashed against a metal utility box, a sharp edge slicing deep into her palm. Pain seared through her hand, and she let out a strangled cry. "Let this be a lesson," one of them barked as he turned away. "We better not see you here again, got it? Or next time, you'll be picking up your damn bones." They walked off laughing, as if they hadn't just assaulted her. Stella clutched her bleeding hand, vision blurring. The pain was unbearable, but it was the humiliation that crushed her more. Her legs gave out beneath her. Darkness closed in. She barely registered the concerned voices around her, the feeling of hands lifting her, the sound of sirens wailing in the distance. A kind-hearted passerby had called an ambulance. By the time she was wheeled into the emergency room, Stella was drifting in and out of consciousness. Dr. Patrick Hayes had seen it all before. When the nurse informed him of a homeless woman with a deep laceration, he barely suppressed a sigh. Another one. No documents, no money. No insurance. These cases always meant a headache, paperwork, red tape, and sometimes a wasted bed. But duty was duty. "Where is she?" he muttered, already pulling on gloves. "Exam room 3, the nurse said. "She's semi-conscious. Lost a lot of blood." Patrick stepped inside, expecting the usual, an older woman, possibly drunk, reeking of the streets. Instead, he stopped in his tracks. Sitting quietly on the examination table was a young woman. She was barely in her 20s. Light brown hair fell in soft waves around her pale face, and when she lifted her gaze, huge grey eyes, soft, pleading, locked onto his. There was no stench of alcohol, no aggressive slurring, just exhaustion and pain. Her clothes were old but clean. A strange sense of recognition prickled at the back of his mind. Shaking it off, he stepped closer. "Let me take a look at that hand," he said, his voice more gentle than usual. She winced as he carefully unwrapped the makeshift bandage someone had applied. Blood had soaked through, and the cut was deep, deep enough to need stitches. "This is going to hurt," he warned before disinfecting the wound. Stella flinched but didn't pull away. As he worked, he tried to make conversation. "What's your name?" "Stella," she murmured, her voice hoarse. "And what exactly happened?" "How'd you manage to get a cut like this?" Stella let out a bitter chuckle. I tried begging today. For the first time." Patrick's hands paused for half a second before continuing. "Didn't go as planned?" She swallowed. "No. There's a whole system, apparently, a racket. A group of guys claimed that spot as theirs. They threw me out, took my money, pushed me around. I fell and hit a metal box." Patrick frowned. He had heard of organised gangs controlling begging spots, but hearing it firsthand made his stomach churn. "You could have ended up with worse than a cut," he muttered. Stella sighed. "I know." There was a pause before she added, "I didn't have any other choice. I lost everything. My papers, my job. I don't even have a place to stay. An old lady is letting me stay with her for now, but she barely has anything herself. I can't just take advantage of her kindness." Patrick stitched in silence, absorbing her words. He had dealt with the homeless before, usually addicts, drifters, people who had long given up. But Stella was different. There was a quiet dignity in the way she spoke, even in her lowest moment. And that face. His hands stilled for just a moment. She looked like her. Helen, his late wife. The resemblance wasn't exact, but it was there, especially in the eyes, the way they held sadness but still fought against it. Something in him shifted. He tied off the last stitch and set down his tools. "All right, Stella," he said, his voice softer now. "Your wound is deep, so I've placed a drain. You'll need to stay for a few days under observation." She tensed. "But No arguments," he cut in firmly. "You need rest. And besides, you don't exactly have anywhere better to go, do you?" She lowered her gaze. "No." Patrick exhaled. "Then that's settled. You'll be admitted to the 3rd ward. It's nearly empty. I'll have the head nurse give you clean linens and a gown. We've even got some food, so stay, heal, rest." Stella sincerely thanked Patrick, relieved to have a roof over her head and regular meals. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't cold, hungry, or afraid of what the next day would bring. Her wound healed steadily. Patrick checked on her regularly, more than usual for a typical patient. He would examine her stitches, ask about her well-being, and sometimes linger in conversation. Even the nurses started to notice. "Patrick, you're visiting the patient in the 3rd ward a lot," one nurse teased. "Is she a relative? An old friend?" Another chimed in, raising an eyebrow. "Her wound has healed. The drain is removed. She could have been discharged days ago, but someone is keeping her here." Patrick sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "She has nowhere to go," he admitted. "She seems like a good person. If I discharge her now, she'll be back on the streets. Let her stay one more day, under my responsibility." The nurses exchanged glances but said nothing more. Meanwhile, Patrick's personal life took an unexpected turn. That morning, his 9-year-old son, Jeremy, had woken up with a nasty cough and a high fever. At first, Patrick thought it was just a cold. But by noon, The fever spiked, and his son was wheezing heavily. The diagnosis was clear: bronchitis. And it wasn't going away in a day or two. The problem was there was no one to stay with Jeremy. Patrick had no family nearby, no one to call for help. Normally, he would have taken leave to care for his son, but with 2 of the hospital's surgeons sent to another district for a mass casualty accident, he was the only experienced surgeon left on duty. His job had to come first. But so did his son. He needed someone to watch over Jeremy, and he needed them now. The next day, Patrick walked into Stella's ward with a determined look. "Stella, I need a favour," he said, leaning against the doorframe. She blinked, caught off guard. "A favour?" He exhaled and ran a hand through his hair. "It's my son, Jeremy. He's been sick for 2 days. At first, I thought it was just a mild cold, but it's turned into bronchitis. His fever's high, and he's on medication, using an inhaler. He's not a little kid, he's 9, but I can't leave him home alone all day." Concern flickered in Stella's eyes. Patrick continued, his voice steady but laced with worry. "It's just the 2 of us. My wife passed away years ago, kidney failure, and I don't have any other family around. Normally I'd take sick leave to be with him, but as luck would have it, 2 of our surgeons were sent out to deal with that massive accident. You might have heard about it. A lot of severe trauma cases. I can't leave the hospital right now." He met her gaze, his expression sincere. "I need someone I can trust to stay with Jeremy, just until he gets better. I'll pay you well, cover all the food, and you'll have a place to stay." Stella hesitated, stunned by the offer. "You said you needed money," Patrick reminded her gently. "This way, you won't have to worry about where to sleep or how to eat. And I'll have peace of mind knowing Jeremy is in good hands. I've already called home 5 times today. I can't focus knowing he's alone." Silence hung between them. On the one hand, the offer was everything she needed: food, shelter, stability, and even pay. But on the other, what if she wasn't good enough? What if Jeremy didn't like her? What if she messed up and let down the only person who had shown her kindness? Stella didn't hesitate, but answered honestly. "I really want to help you, Patrick, I do, but I'm not sure I can handle it. I've never been a nanny before, never really taken care of a child. What if I mess up? What if your son doesn't like me?" Patrick smiled reassuringly. "Don't worry about that. Jeremy is a calm, polite kid. He won't give you any trouble. I'll explain everything you need to do, and you'll be just fine. Besides, it'll put my mind at ease. Right now, I'm worrying every 30 minutes about whether he's eaten, taken his medicine. If you're with him, I won't have to stress so much." Stella took a deep breath and nodded. "Okay, I'll do it." Patrick's shoulders relaxed, relief washing over him. That evening, after she was officially discharged, Stella left the hospital with the doctor, heading toward his home. At first, she felt incredibly out of place. Patrick's house, no, mansion, was nothing like what she was used to. It was spacious, clean, and filled with warmth, but she still hesitated to step too far inside, unsure where she belonged in such a grand setting. Sensing her unease, Patrick led her to Jeremy's room. Inside, a thin, fair-haired boy sat on the floor, playing with a set of toy cars. At the sight of them, he looked up, surprised, his voice raspy from his illness. "Hi, Dad. Do we have guests? Is this the lady from your work?" Patrick smiled, stepping forward and brushing his hand over Jeremy's forehead to check for fever. "No, son. Meet Stella. She's going to be staying with us for a little while to help take care of you while you're sick. I'm really worried about you." His tone shifted slightly as he noticed the untouched bowl of soup on the bedside table. "And for good reason. You've got a fever again, and instead of resting, you've been playing all day. Did you take your medicine? Why haven't you eaten? The soup is still full. Have you been skipping meals again, Jeremy?" The boy looked down guiltily, picking at the hem of his sleeve. "I know, Dad, but I just don't have any appetite. And my throat really hurts. It stings when I swallow. Plus, lying in bed alone all day is so boring." Then his eyes lit up as he looked at Stella. But now that you're here, maybe it won't be so bad. Do you know how to play checkers? Or lotto? And can we draw together? Stella laughed softly. Of course I do. But first we both need to get better. Otherwise we'll upset your dad. And we wouldn't want that, would we? She winked at Patrick before turning back to the boy. You know, Jeremy, my grandma used to make a special porridge whenever I was sick. She called it healing porridge. Jeremy squinted at her, skeptical. Healing porridge? Yep. Stella nodded enthusiastically. It's like magic. It makes your throat hurt less and helps you get better faster. Want to give it a try? I'll whip it up in no time. Jeremy hesitated, wrinkling his nose. I don't really like porridge. Dad's is always bland. But if this one is healing, then... Okay, fine. Let's check it out. I don't want to be sick anymore. Stella grinned. Deal. She turned to Patrick. Could you show me where everything is in the kitchen? Patrick, still watching her with curiosity, nodded. Sure. Let's go. In the kitchen, Stella wasted no time. She moved with confidence, asking Patrick where the necessary ingredients were and quickly getting to work. She prepared berry jelly and set it aside to cool. Then she made a velvety semolina pudding, adding vanilla and raisins for extra flavor. Finally, she carefully plated everything, making sure it looked as good as it tasted. When she brought the meal to Jeremy, his eyes widened. The bowl wasn't just filled with plain old porridge, it was a creamy golden treat topped with glistening berries and a drizzle of honey. Whoa, he murmured. It looks good. Patrick, standing beside him, was just as surprised. He had expected a simple meal, but what Stella had prepared looked downright appetizing. Jeremy hesitated only a second before taking a cautious spoonful. His eyebrows shot up in surprise. Hey, this is actually good, he exclaimed. Patrick chuckled. I'll try some too, then. He took a bite, then raised an eyebrow at Stella. Okay, this is seriously good. Where'd you learn to cook like this? Stella shrugged with a small smile. I've always loved cooking. And when you're struggling, you learn how to make simple ingredients taste great. Jeremy beamed at her. I like this kind of porridge. It's way better than Dad's. And it's great that you'll be home with me now. At least it won't be boring. Stella laughed. That's the spirit. We'll have fun and get you healthy. Dad, I took my pills. Can I watch cartoons? Jeremy asked, looking up expectantly. Patrick nodded. All right, but just for a little while. Then we'll use the inhaler before bed. Turning to Stella, he smiled. Stella, you're amazing. Jeremy has always been a picky eater, even when he's healthy. And now, with his illness, getting him to eat is even harder. I'm not much of a cook, to be honest. He let out a small chuckle. My son loves pizza. He asks for it all the time, but I know he needs proper nutrition, so I try my best. The problem is he doesn't really like my cooking. But your meal? He ate it in seconds. His expression softened. And you two have already become friends. I'm really glad. He gestured toward the hallway. Come on, I'll show you your room. Stella felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. She was relieved that Jeremy had taken to her so quickly, and even more so that she had made him eat. The tension she had carried since stepping into the house eased a little. Maybe, just maybe, this could work out. The room Patrick led her to was beautiful, spacious, bright, and filled with warmth. A small balcony let in a gentle breeze, and soft curtains framed the large windows. On a dressing table sat an array of perfumes and women's cosmetics. Stella studied them with quiet curiosity. Patrick noticed and spoke gently. This was my wife Helen's room. After she passed, I couldn't bring myself to change anything. He nodded toward the closet. There are fresh bed linens and towels inside. Feel free to use anything you need. They're all new. Helen was a bit of a fashionista. She always liked to buy things in advance. His voice held a trace of nostalgia, but he quickly shook it off. Well, make yourself at home. The bathroom is down the hall to the left. Get some rest. Good night, Stella. Good night, Patrick, she replied softly. Later, Stella sank into the warmth of a steaming bath, letting the scented bubbles and expensive shampoo wash away the weight of the past few days. Wrapped in a plush terry robe, she exhaled deeply, feeling an unfamiliar but welcome sense of comfort. How little a person really needs to be happy, she thought, a small, contented smile touching her lips. Stella closed her eyes, but sleep refused to come. Her mind wouldn't quiet. Memories churned, surfacing one after another, dragging her back to the past she had tried so hard to leave behind. She had grown up in a small village with her mother, Marion, and her grandmother, Amy. Her father had died in an accident when she was just 9. She barely remembered him now, just a vague impression of warmth, of a strong voice and gentle hands. But she remembered her mother all too well. Marion had always been difficult, impossible to please. Even when her father was alive, she had nagged him constantly. And after he was gone, all that pent-up bitterness had turned on Stella. Her mother's sharp voice still echoed in her mind. "How many times do I have to tell you? Stop stomping around like an elephant. My head is killing me." "Did you do your homework? What's this? A C? Honestly, what a scatterbrain." Nothing was ever good enough. Stella had tried to argue, to stand up for herself, but it never ended well. If she cried, it only made her mother angrier. "Oh, for heaven's sake, why are you bawling like a baby? Go wash the dishes instead. I come home from work and the house is a disaster." The fear had settled in early. She tiptoed around the house, always bracing for criticism, always wondering what she'd done wrong this time. If it weren't for Grandma Amy, Stella might have run away. Her grandmother had been her refuge, her only source of warmth in that cold house. Amy had loved her unconditionally, soothed her when no one else would. "Don't listen to anyone, my smart girl," she would say, pulling Stella into a soft embrace. "Your mother gets tired, that's all. It's not easy for her raising you alone. She loves you in her own way. She just doesn't know how to show it." But Stella had never believed that. Amy was the only one who truly saw her, who praised her efforts, who comforted her when she came home with a bad grade. "Oh, sweetheart, everyone gets a C sometimes. It's nothing to cry over. You'll fix it. Come here, let me stroke your head. There, my little doll." Stella would bury her face in her grandmother's shoulder, inhaling the faint scent of herbs that always clung to her clothes. Amy had once been a medic. She knew the power of plants, and the villagers often came to her for remedies. She would take Stella with her on long walks through the forest, pointing out the treasures hidden underfoot. When Stella was 10, she and her friends went swimming in the river, their laughter echoing across the water. Everyone knew the rule: never swim to the other side. There were whispers about a deep whirlpool lurking beneath the surface. But kids will be kids. Curiosity got the best of them, and soon someone suggested a race. Who would be the first to reach the forbidden side? Determined to win, Stella surged ahead. She was a strong swimmer, cutting through the water with ease. She reached the middle first, right where the whirlpool waited. Then everything went wrong. A powerful current wrapped around her like invisible hands, pulling her down. Panic set in. She kicked and thrashed, but the water only gripped her tighter. "Help! I'm drowning!" she screamed, her voice raw with terror. The cold seeped into her muscles, and then a sharp pain shot through her leg. A cramp. She let out a strangled cry as she sank beneath the surface. On the shore, her friends stood frozen in horror. None of them dared to dive in after her. Instead, they ran along the bank, screaming, "Help! Stella is drowning! Somebody help!" Drew heard them. He was fishing nearby, a teenager 5 years older than Stella. Without a second thought, he dropped his rod and dove into the river. The current was strong, threatening to pull them both under. But Drew didn't hesitate. He fought against the water, reaching for her, gripping her tightly. Somehow, against all odds, he dragged her to shore. Coughing, gasping for breath, Stella clung to him, trembling from shock. Tears streamed down her face as she sobbed into his soaked shirt. "You saved me. You saved me." That day changed everything. From then on, Stella and Drew were inseparable. They spent their days walking along that very river, sharing their thoughts, their worries, their dreams. What had started as childhood friendship slowly grew into something deeper, something tender and unspoken. Drew never pushed. He never crossed any lines. Instead, he brought her bunches of wildflowers, left little surprises by her window, and walked her home when the sun dipped below the horizon. But not everyone approved. Marian hated it. "Off to see Drew again, are you?" She would sneer whenever Stella slipped out. "You're 16 and already sneaking off to meet some boy? Listen to me. Don't you dare come home pregnant. If you do, I swear I'll lock you up. You won't be going anywhere." Stella fought back tears. "Mum, it's not like that. We just talk. Why can't you understand?" But Marian didn't listen. "It's too early for you to be out in the evenings. Focus on your studies. Help your mother instead of running around after some boy." The words stung, but they didn't stop her. She learned to wait for her mother to fall asleep, then slip out quietly to steal even an hour with Drew. Those moments became everything to her. The way he listened, the way he understood her, the way his presence felt like home. Only Grandma Amy supported her. She would give Stella a knowing smile, cover for her when necessary, and whisper, "Love is rare, my little doll. Don't let anyone tell you it's not real just because you're young." Then, tragedy struck. One morning, Grandma Amy never woke up. She had passed away in her sleep, slipping away peacefully, leaving Stella utterly shattered. For weeks she visited her grave, sitting there for hours, whispering secrets into the silence. But everything changed after Amy was gone. Without her, Marian became unbearable. The house was filled with fights, slammed doors, cold silences. Then, one evening, her mother made an announcement that would break Stella's heart. "I'm selling the house. We're moving to the city." Stella's breath caught. "No!" "Yes. It's time for a new life. I'm sick of this village, this back-breaking work. There's no future for you here." Panic clawed at Stella's chest. "I have a future here. I have Drew." Marian scoffed. "Oh, please, that's childish nonsense. You'll have plenty of Drews in your life. We leave in a week." Stella begged. She cried, pleaded, tried to reason with her mother. "Mom, please, don't do this. I love him. I can't live without him." But Marian simply waved a dismissive hand. "Enough! You're too young to know what love is. Stop this foolishness. Pack your things." And just like that, it was over. Stella never got to say goodbye. 1 week later, she was ripped away from everything she knew, forced into a new life she never wanted. Life in the big city never felt like home. After moving, Stella and her mother rented a small apartment on the outskirts. Marian found work as a cook, while Stella enrolled in a technical school to study tailoring. But everything about the city felt strange, cold, impersonal. She missed the familiar quiet of the village, the fresh scent of wildflowers, and most of all, she missed him. Drew haunted her dreams, always the same, standing there smiling, holding out a handful of daisies. She would wake with a damp pillow, her heart aching, her mood dark for the rest of the day. 3 years passed in a blur. Stella was nearly done with her studies, but something was wrong with her mother. Marian was wasting away before her eyes, growing thinner, weaker. She barely ate, barely slept, but waved off Stella's concerns. "Just exhaustion," she insisted. "Long hours, too much work." Stella knew better, and when she finally convinced her mother to see a doctor, the diagnosis was merciless. There was no treatment, no hope. "She has months, maybe weeks," the doctors said. Stella was devastated. Her mother passed away 3 months later. But before she did, for the first time in her life, she softened. With a frail voice, she whispered, "Forgive me, daughter, for being so strict, for not giving you enough love." Tears streamed down Stella's face as she clutched her mother's withered hands. "I love you, Mom. Don't leave me. Please don't leave me. I don't know how to be alone. I'm scared." Marian's last words echoed in her mind long after she was gone. "Don't cry, dear. Find yourself a wealthy husband. You see how I struggled alone? You need someone to lean on. After the funeral, Stella had no idea how to go on. Their small savings were spent on burial costs and quickly dwindled. She was alone in the world, barely scraping by. Desperate, she remembered her mother's advice and married the first man who offered her security. She met Ian by chance. He had given her a ride one morning, introduced himself as an entrepreneur, charming and confident. He spoke of a good life, security, love. Stella, lost and vulnerable, believed him. They had a modest wedding. He had his own apartment. It seemed like stability. But the dream quickly crumbled. Ian was no entrepreneur. He was a gambler. He didn't work. He disappeared at night, coming home smelling of alcohol and bad decisions. The fight started soon after. "Stella, don't start," he snapped when she pleaded with him to settle down. "I just want a normal life, Ian. A home, a family." "And I'll give you that, babe. Just stop nagging." But it never got better. 6 months in, Ian lost big. This time there was no way out. He disappeared, running from his debts before the collectors could find him. But they did find Stella. Strangers barged into the apartment one evening, throwing her out with nothing but the clothes on her back. "Your husband ran off," one of them sneered. "So guess who's paying up now?" "I don't have anything," she cried, trembling. "Then don't come back, unless you want to start working off his debts another way." They slammed the door in her face. Just like that, she was on the streets. She wandered aimlessly, sleeping in doorways, cold and starving, reduced to begging for scraps. Fear gripped her deeper than anything she had ever known. Was this her life now? Nothing but endless poverty and hopelessness? She had no future, no home, no one to turn to. Until Zoe, the local janitor, found her shivering on a bench. Zoe was as poor as a church mouse herself, but she had a kind heart. She took Stella in, shared what little she had. But Stella hated being a burden. So, in desperation, she tried begging, only to end up beaten and robbed. And now, even in the warmth of Patrick's house, safety finally within reach, her thoughts tormented her. "I can't stay here forever. Once Jeremy gets better, where will I go? Back to the streets? Beg Zoe for a place to sleep? If only I could get my documents back." The next morning, she pushed her fears aside and started her duties as a nanny. Jeremy was easy to love. He was bright, kind, and eager for company. Stella took care of him like a mother would, following Patrick's medical prescriptions, but also using her grandmother's old remedies. Potato and soda compresses to ease his cough, warm herbal teas to soothe his throat. Day by day, the boy got better. They cooked together, tidied the house together. It was more fun that way. And in the evenings, they played checkers and lotto, filling the house with laughter. Days passed quickly. Patrick was fully immersed in work, coming home late, exhausted and hungry. But now, with Stella living with them, the house felt different, warmer, more alive. He ate dinner with genuine appreciation, grateful not only for the delicious meals, but also for seeing his son getting better, full of energy again. He couldn't stop thanking Stella. "Stella, you're a miracle worker. Thank you. What would I do without you? I can finally work without worrying about what's happening at home. If it were up to me, I'd never let you go." One evening, Stella and Jeremy were in the kitchen, making dumplings together. The boy was focused, carefully shaping the dough, though his dumplings came out uneven and oversized. Stella didn't mind. She praised him enthusiastically. "You're doing great. These look perfect." Jeremy beamed. "Dad will love them. He saves people all day and still comes home to take care of me. He worries so much when I'm sick." Then, lowering his voice as if revealing a great secret, he added, "You know, he's not my real dad." Stella frowned in surprise. "Jeremy, don't say that. Of course he's your real dad." Jeremy shook his head. "No, he's my uncle." Seeing Stella's confusion, he continued, his voice steady. "My parents died when I was really little. I was home alone one day and found some papers in Dad's drawer, my birth certificate. My parents' death certificates, and an adoption paper. Stella's heart clenched. Jeremy sighed. At first I was sad, knowing my real mom and dad were gone, but then I realized I was lucky. I could have ended up in an orphanage, but instead I got him. A proud smile crossed his face. And he's the best dad in the world. Just don't tell him I snooped through his drawer. He'd be upset. Stella was speechless. She had admired Patrick before, but now she respected him even more. Raising his orphaned nephew as his own son. Few men would do that. She promised Jeremy she'd keep his secret. A few weeks later, Patrick approached Stella one evening. His expression was somber. "Today is an important day for me," he said quietly, "but also a sad one." He sighed and rubbed his temples before continuing. "On this day, years ago, my brother Drew died in an accident. I always visit his grave. It helps." He poured a drink, handing Stella a glass. "Let's remember him, Stella." A small toast. May he rest in peace, and Alice too. They drank in silence without clinking glasses. "Such a senseless loss," Patrick murmured. "They were so young, their whole lives ahead of them." Stella hesitated before asking cautiously, "Tell me about him. What was your brother like? You grew up together, right?" Patrick let out a heavy breath. "Not exactly." He leaned back, staring into the distance as memories surfaced. "Our family's story isn't the happiest. Our parents divorced when we were just a year old, and for some reason they decided to split us too. Dad took Drew to the countryside. Mom stayed in the city with me." His jaw tightened. "They never forgave each other. For years we were strangers, but as adults, we reconnected. We became close again. Then the tragedies started, like a curse." His voice dropped. "First, my Helen died. I thought I'd go insane from the grief. The pain was unbearable." A shadow passed over his face. "Drew and Alice were there for me. They saved me from drowning in it. I spent more time at their house than my own. They had a little boy, and they asked me to be his godfather. I was honored." Patrick stared at his drink, swirling it absently. "And then, just when I was beginning to heal, another tragedy struck. Drew and Alice were killed in a car crash. In one night, Jeremy was left an orphan, and I lost my brother." His voice faltered. He exhaled deeply before continuing. "I couldn't let him go into the system. I had already lost so much. So, I adopted him." He looked at Stella, his expression full of quiet intensity. "I love him as if he were my own. Maybe even more because I know how fragile life is. But Jeremy doesn't know the full story. He still thinks I'm his real father." Stella smirked. "Patrick, you're not as good a secret keeper as you think." Patrick frowned. "What do you mean?" She grinned. "Jeremy knows everything." "What?" "He found the documents a long time ago. He read them all but kept quiet because he didn't want to upset you." Patrick stared, then let out a breathless chuckle, shaking his head. "That kid. He's more mature than his years. Maybe it's for the best. I would have had to tell him someday." A silence settled between them before Stella hesitated, then asked, "Can I see a picture of Drew?" "I'd love to know who Jeremy resembles." Patrick nodded. "Of course, I'll get the album." As he stood, he glanced at her and smiled slightly. Patrick opened the photo album, flipping through old pictures, pausing to share stories. "These were my parents. Young and so full of life. Hard to believe they're gone." He turned a page. "And this is Drew with Alice. You'd agree, we didn't look much alike." Then, another picture. A childhood photo of Drew. "This is the only one I have left. He was such a funny, awkward kid." Stella leaned in, her eyes scanning the photo, and then she froze. Her heartbeat quickened. "It can't be," she whispered. Patrick looked at her, puzzled. "What is it?" Stella's eyes filled with tears. "Drew. From Hines?" Her voice shook. "That's my Drew." Patrick's brow furrowed. What do you mean? Stella swallowed hard, memories crashing over her like waves. I knew your brother, Patrick. He saved my life when I was a child. He pulled me out of the river. After that, we became best friends. And then, more than that, we fell in love. She blinked back tears, a wistful smile forming. He used to bring me wildflowers. He'd look at me like I was his whole world. But my mother, she took me away, sold our house, dragged me to the city. She wouldn't even let me say goodbye. Her voice broke. I cried for him for years. I missed him so much. And now he's gone. Tears welled in her eyes as she traced Drew's face in the photograph, her fingers trembling. Patrick watched her carefully. What a strange twist of fate, he murmured. He hesitated before asking, and after that? What happened to you? You've never talked about your past. He looked at her gently. But since tonight is a night of memories and revelations, maybe you'll share. Do you really have no one left? Stella let out a shaky breath, her gaze distant. What's there to tell? Just troubles and misfortunes. Her voice dropped. I finished school, got my diploma. Then, my mother died. Stella sighed. She had an advanced illness, burned out like a candle in just 3 months. We never really got along. We were too different, but at least she was someone. After the funeral, everything fell apart. There was no money for rent, no one would hire me without experience, and, in a moment of desperation, I made a reckless decision. I married the first man who offered stability. She let out a bitter chuckle. But, as it usually happens, where there's no love, there's no happiness. Ian turned out to be a gambler. He lost everything and ran away to avoid prison. Her voice wavered slightly. The thugs took over his apartment. They threw me out with nothing, not even my documents. And they made it clear that if I came back, I'd be paying off his debts one way or another. She swallowed hard. That's how I ended up on the streets. Her gaze turned distant, lost in the past. Wandering, cold, starving, terrified, sitting on a park bench at night, watching the windows of strangers' homes glow with warmth. Inside, families were waiting for their loved ones. And I had no one. I was needed by no one. A deep breath, a faint, sad smile. A kind janitor took pity on me, gave me shelter, but she had so little herself. So I tried begging, and even that ended in disaster. She looked up at Patrick, her voice soft yet firm. I ended up in the hospital with you. She sighed again. That's my whole story, Patrick. Her fingers fidgeted slightly in her lap. So, thank you for taking me in, giving me work. She hesitated before adding, I've almost restored my documents. I'll pick them up in 3 days. Her lips trembled slightly, but she forced a smile. I'll be leaving soon. I don't want to burden you and Jeremy any longer. Patrick was silent for a moment, watching her carefully. Then, gently, he reached for her hand. Stella, he said, his voice warm, steady. Stay here with me. For good. She blinked, startled. Jeremy is happy with you, I can see that. And I feel at ease with you here. A small smile played on his lips. Besides, we're not strangers, are we? You loved my brother, so you were his family. And that means you're valuable to me too. His grip tightened slightly, as if anchoring her. Consider it me taking you under my wing. I'll take care of you, I'll protect you. No objections. His voice softened as he added, after Helen died, a part of me died too. Jeremy was the only thing that kept me going. But when I first saw you, I couldn't shake the feeling that you reminded me of someone. He reached for an old photo and handed it to her. Look, do you see it? Stella's breath caught. The resemblance was undeniable. Her eyes, her hair, even something in her expression. Patrick nodded. You and Helen. You share similar features. Maybe that's why I felt drawn to you from the start, like you weren't a stranger. Her eyes shimmered with emotion. "Patrick," she whispered, voice thick with tears. "Thank you." She wiped at her eyes and after a pause murmured, "I'll gladly accept your offer, because I truly have nowhere else to go." Her voice wavered, raw with honesty. "The thought of wandering again, it makes me feel like I don't want to live." She exhaled deeply. "Your home is warm, safe, and Jeremy and I, we're already best friends." She hesitated before looking up at him with hopeful eyes. "Patrick, I have one more request. I hope you won't think I'm being too bold." He tilted his head. "Go on." "I'd love to work. I've been good at sewing since childhood, and I learned even more in college. I could take orders from home. I just want to try, to prove I'm capable of something." She swallowed, then smiled slightly. "I noticed a sewing machine in your closet. Could I use it?" Patrick laughed. "Why are you even asking? Take whatever you need." He gestured toward the shelves. "There's not just a machine. There's a whole collection of fabrics gathering dust. My mom was an incredible seamstress. She loved to sew. Everything she left behind is still here." He smirked. "Put it to good use." Then, thoughtfully, he added, "I'll ask around at work. Maybe someone needs something made. And Jeremy can help you post ads online. He's practically a tech genius." From across the room, Jeremy's voice chimed in. "That's right. I'll have you set up in no time." Patrick chuckled. "See, you're already in business." And so, Stella stayed. With each passing day, she and Patrick grew closer. Until one evening, everything changed. She was washing dishes late at night when she felt him approach from behind. A shiver ran down her spine as his arms wrapped around her waist. His breath was warm against her neck as he whispered, "Sweet Stella, do you know how good it feels coming home to you?" A pause. Then softer, more vulnerable. "I love you." Her breath hitched. He turned her gently in his arms, searching her eyes. "Be my wife, Stella." "We're already living like a family. Let's make it real." For a moment, she stood frozen. Then, something inside her exploded. A wave of tenderness, of longing, of pure, unfiltered love surged through her. She threw her arms around his neck, and they kissed. Deep, fierce, consuming. The world slipped away. Their wedding was modest but heartfelt. Patrick invited only their closest friends. Jeremy, ecstatic, had long since started calling Stella Mom without even realizing it. Eager to help, he set up online ads for her sewing business, and soon the first orders started rolling in. Stella poured herself into her craft, finding not just fulfillment but a steady income. For the first time in years, she felt happy. Life was good. And then, on a freezing winter evening, everything shifted again. Stella was walking home from the store when she spotted something, or rather someone, on a bench. An old man hunched over, shivering violently. His coat was too thin for the season. His hands, blue from the cold, shook as he blew into them, desperate for warmth. Her heart clenched. Stella's heart ached for the poor man. The sight of him sitting there, frozen and helpless, brought back memories of her own days of wandering. Without hesitation, she approached him with kindness in her voice. "Good evening. I'm sorry to intrude, but it's bitterly cold outside, and you're dressed so lightly. Why are you here? Do you need help?" The old man slowly lifted his head, his lips barely moving as he whispered, "I have nowhere to go, dear. I don't even know who I am or where I'm from." Stella felt a pang of sorrow. She didn't want to overwhelm him with questions, so instead she simply extended her hand. "Come with me. You need to warm up before you get frostbite." The man hesitated, his eyes filled with gratitude and disbelief. Then, shuffling to his feet, he muttered, "Thank you for your kind heart. I won't refuse a bit of warmth. Don't worry, I'll just sit for a while and then leave. I don't want to be a burden." When Stella entered the house, Jeremy ran to meet her in the hallway. His eyes widened when he saw the unfamiliar guest. "Mom, you're not alone? Who is this?" Stella gently placed a hand on Jeremy's shoulder. "Hi, sweetheart. This is just a passerby. He was out in the cold. Take the bags inside and put the kettle on. We need to warm up our guest. She turned to the old man with a warm smile. Let's introduce ourselves properly. My name is Stella. My husband, Patrick, will be home soon. And this is our son, Jeremy. And you are? The man hesitated, then murmured, I think my name is Simon, but I'm not sure. Stella frowned. What do you mean, not sure? You don't remember your name? The old man took a sip of the hot tea Jeremy had brought, sighing with relief as the warmth spread through him. I don't understand it myself, he admitted. It's like my mind is a blank slate, wiped clean. He hesitated before continuing. 3 months ago, construction workers found me in a ditch, unconscious, with a terrible head wound. Someone must have hit me hard. His voice was tinged with frustration. They asked me who I was, where I was from, but I couldn't remember a thing. They started calling me Simon. They gave me some clothes, fed me. But without money or documents, what could I do? I've been wandering ever since, hoping something would come back to me. Stella shook her head in disbelief. She could see the helplessness in his tired eyes. This man wasn't lying. She went to the closet, took out a clean towel and a bathrobe and handed them to him. Here's the deal. I'm not letting you freeze out there. She gave him a firm but kind look. Take a shower. There's a new razor on the shelf. I'll show you everything. Meanwhile, I'll start dinner and prepare a room for you. You'll stay with us for now, and we'll figure things out later. Tears welled up in Simon's eyes. Thank you, Stella. But are you sure? Won't your husband mind? I don't want to be a burden. Stella smiled gently. Patrick will understand. He once took me in from the streets, just like I'm taking you in now. And we fell in love, got married. He has a kind heart. She hesitated before adding softly, I understand you, Simon. More than you know. I was in a similar situation once, without a home, without money, wandering the city in despair. But good-hearted people helped me, and life gradually got better. Now, it's my turn to help. Her voice was steady as she reassured him. You don't owe me anything. This is from the heart. With that, she headed toward the kitchen. Now go freshen up. See you at dinner. As Simon was washing up, Patrick arrived home. Stella quickly filled him in, watching his expression carefully. You're not upset that I brought Simon home without asking you first? She asked anxiously. Patrick pulled her into a gentle embrace. Of course not. If someone is in trouble, we should always try to help. Just then, Simon stepped out of the bathroom, and Stella gasped. Gone was the frail, ragged man she had found on the bench. Standing before them was a dignified, silver-haired gentleman with intelligent eyes, looking almost regal despite the sadness that still lingered in them. She introduced him to Patrick, and they all sat down for dinner. At first, Simon was reserved, but Jeremy, ever the chatterbox, talked non-stop about his hobbies, showing off his crafts and drawings. Slowly, Simon relaxed, settling into the warmth of the family. Hearing Simon's story, Patrick immediately spoke up. You know, medicine has advanced a lot. There are many ways to help restore lost memories. If you'd like, I can take you to a specialist tomorrow. Hypnosis, medication, something might help. Simon's eyes lit up with hope. Really? You'd do that for me? Patrick nodded. Of course. The sooner we start treatment, the better the chances of success. Simon's voice trembled with gratitude. Thank you, Patrick. More than anything, I just want to understand who I am. Maybe I have a family, people searching for me. His voice faltered. Right now, I feel like a lost soul. Everything is unfamiliar. It's terrifying. Jeremy suddenly grinned. Grandpa Simon, are you going to live with us now? That's great. I'll have company. The boy's eyes sparkled. Do you know how to make airplanes or wooden ships? I have a kit, but Dad is always too busy. Simon chuckled, genuinely touched. Of course, kid. I've got all the time in the world. We'll build the most beautiful ship together. I promise. The next day, Patrick took Simon to a trusted psychotherapist. The doctor agreed to take on the case, prescribing medication and hypnosis sessions. And then, a miracle happened. Within a month, Simon remembered everything. But what he revealed shocked them all. His real name wasn't Simon. It was Gilbert Schneider. And he wasn't just an old man wandering the streets. He was a wealthy businessman, the owner of a well-known grocery store chain. His own stepson, Victor, had tried to kill him. Gilbert had planned to pass the company to his biological son, Daniel, a responsible, hard-working young man. But Victor, greedy, reckless, and spoiled by his mother, wanted everything for himself. The plan had been clear. Gilbert had been driving home from an important meeting when his car conveniently broke down. Instead of calling a cab, he decided to walk. That's when Victor attacked him near a construction site, hitting him on the head, leaving him for dead. The last thing Gilbert remembered before blacking out was Victor's face, twisted in a cruel smirk. "Die already, old man," Victor had sneered. "And don't worry, your precious Daniel will follow soon. Everything will belong to me and my mother." Then, darkness. Now that his memories were back, Gilbert wasted no time. With Patrick and Stella by his side, he went straight to the police. There, he learned something else. His biological son, Daniel, had never stopped looking for him. An investigation was launched. Witnesses were found, the construction workers who had pulled Gilbert from the ditch, saving his life. Justice was swift. Victor and his mother were arrested. And finally, after months of suffering, Gilbert was reunited with his son. Daniel broke down in tears, wrapping his arms around his father in a tight embrace. Gilbert, overwhelmed with emotion, held him just as tightly, unable to believe that he had finally found his son again. "Dad, thank God you're alive," Daniel choked out. "I thought I'd go insane when you disappeared. You never came home after that meeting, and I had no idea what had happened to you." His voice trembled with emotion as he continued. "I turned the whole city upside down trying to find you. I filed a police report, checked hospitals, even morgues. These past 3 months have been the worst of my life." Then his expression darkened. "But you should have seen how Victor and my stepmother acted. They were practically glowing. They didn't even pretend to be worried." He clenched his fists. "I overheard them whispering about splitting up your property, selling the business. I told them I was the rightful heir, but they didn't care. Angela said since her husband was surely dead, it was time to divide the assets." Daniel's voice wavered. "But I never gave up on you, Dad. I knew you were alive. My heart told me so." Gilbert sighed heavily, guilt weighing on his shoulders. "Yes, son. Now I see how wrong I was." He ran a hand over his face, exhausted by the realization. "You warned me about Angela from the beginning. You were against our marriage, and we argued more than once. I thought it was just childish jealousy. But you were right." His voice grew bitter. "That woman played the perfect loving wife, and I believed her completely." His gaze hardened. "And Victor? He's been troubled since childhood. He never cared about anything except girls, partying, and, of course, my money." Gilbert exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Can you imagine? He didn't even hide his face when he tried to kill me. He actually yelled at me to die faster." His voice broke with disbelief. "After everything I gave him, I never denied him anything. I provided for him, gave him the best of everything. And in return, I got a rock to the head." His eyes filled with sorrow. "Tell me, Daniel, how? How could he do this? How could my own stepson try to kill me?" He looked at his son with deep gratitude. "If it weren't for Patrick and Stella, I'd still be wandering the streets, lost, never knowing who I was. And worst of all, I would never have found you again." Daniel turned to Stella and Patrick, his eyes filled with sincerity. "Thank you, both of you, from the bottom of my heart." His voice wavered with emotion. "You saved my father's life. I'll never forget this. I owe you everything." He clenched his jaw. What a nest of vipers my father nurtured under his roof. Patrick cleared his throat, bringing them back to the present. Daniel, I'd like to admit your father to the hospital for a full checkup. He's been living on the streets for months, and his health is compromised. That dry cough of his, it concerns me. Daniel nodded immediately. You're absolutely right. Dad, you need to get checked out. Gilbert initially protested, but finally agreed. He was placed in a private hospital room, where Patrick oversaw his treatment personally. A few days later, Patrick was reviewing Gilbert's medical tests when something made his heart stop. His hands trembled as he rechecked the data, nearly dropping his glasses. Gilbert's blood type. It was extremely rare. And not just that, his phenotype was identical to Patrick's. A match like this wasn't a coincidence. This only happened between close relatives. Heart pounding, Patrick rushed to Gilbert's room. Mr. Schneider, your test results came in. And, well, you won't believe this. He took a deep breath. We have the same blood type and phenotype. Gilbert raised an eyebrow. So? Patrick's voice was almost shaking. This only happens if we're related, and not distantly, closely related. He hesitated before adding, but is that even possible? I grew up with my mother. Her name was Irene Bennett. Does that name mean anything to you? Gilbert's entire body stiffened. His eyes widened, shimmering with sudden emotion. What did you say? His voice was barely a whisper. Irene Bennett. Did she by any chance go to Summit Ridge College? Patrick nodded. Yes, she graduated from there and worked as a teacher all her life. Gilbert swallowed hard, his breath shaky. Yes, I knew her, and quite well. His voice dropped, thick with emotion. We had a relationship, a brief one. We were young. She was beautiful but fiery, stubborn. He let out a soft chuckle full of nostalgia. We had feelings for each other, but we fought too much. One day, we had a huge argument, and to spite me, she married another man within a month. He sighed heavily. It hurt, but life moved on. I got married too, had a son, Daniel. But my first marriage didn't last. Then I married Angela, and, well, you know how that turned out. His eyes searched Patrick's face. Are you saying that I might be your father? He shook his head in disbelief. No, that's not possible. Irene never told me she was pregnant, and we weren't together long. Patrick exhaled. I know the odds are low, but coincidences like this, they don't happen without reason. His voice grew firm. Let's do a DNA test, just to be sure. Gilbert nodded slowly. All right. Tell me what needs to be done. If there's even a chance. His voice softened. I'd be honored to have a son like you, Patrick. I mean that. 3 days later, the results came in. Patrick held the envelope in his hands, his heart pounding. He tore it open and scanned the paper. His breath caught. It was true. Gilbert was his father. Tears welled in the businessman's eyes as he whispered, Thank you, son, for not abandoning your old man, for saving me, for bringing me home. His voice cracked. When Stella brought me into your house, I was so worried. I thought, who needs an old lost vagrant? But you treated me like family. And now I am family. He swallowed hard. Can I hug you? As a father should? Patrick's own emotions overwhelmed him. He nodded. And for the first time in his life, his real father embraced him. After Gilbert was discharged, they gathered around the dinner table at Patrick's home. For the first time, they were a family. Daniel was overjoyed to have a brother. Jeremy was thrilled to have a grandfather. And Patrick? He looked at them all, his wife, his son, his father, and his newfound brother, and felt whole. Stella watched them, eyes brimming with gratitude. She silently thanked fate for leading her here, for giving her a husband, a son, and now, a real family. Jeremy had already started asking for a sibling, and now she and Patrick were seriously considering it. Her life had been divided into before and after. The struggles, the betrayals, the loneliness. It was all in the past. Ahead of her was only warmth, love, and the promise of a beautiful future. Because when you do good for others, it always comes back 100-fold.